Good afternoon to you. Mark Suttoth, HurricaneTrack.com here. It is Saturday, the 22nd of October. Got to figure out what month it is. October 2022. We need to talk about very powerful Category 4 now, Hurricane Roslyn, as it makes its way towards the Mexican coastline. Very concerning, and it certainly has intensified more than I was even anticipating. I did say yesterday that I thought it could potentially be stronger than the forecast was indicating, and that certainly is what happened. Certainly has exceeded our expectations so far, and a very, very dangerous setup here coming for parts of the Mexican coastline overnight tonight and especially during the day tomorrow. So let's take a look at that, and we're going to talk about the Caribbean, the Eastern Caribbean. I'm getting more interested in that area, especially as we go through time. First of all, it wasn't 10 minutes after I finished up my update yesterday, processing it and getting it on YouTube, that this popped up. I was like, oh man, but you know what? It's out in the open Atlantic, only of interest really to shipping, maritime interest that might happen to be traversing that part of the open Atlantic. It'd be interesting to see, how they have flight aware for all the planes and everything, and there's other flight services too, but I'm sure there's some kind of a Mariner type, like the analog to that for tracking ships at sea. I wonder how many of them are really out in the open Atlantic like that, or do they stay closer to land when they can? Just some kind of a curiosity of mine. Nevertheless, we do have this area that we will be watching, subtropical in nature, non-tropical, whatever you want to call it. Might try to develop just a little bit more. And again, yes, it is important for any types of shipping, maritime interests that are out there, but little concern, if no concern at all, honestly, to land areas. And that includes the next 5 days as well, as it tracks off towards the northwest with time. So really the big issue here is Roslyn, 115 knots, 130 mile per hour, Category 4, air pressure 955 millibars, moving along now at about 8 miles per hour. It's going to start to accelerate as it makes the turn and comes around to the west there of Puerto Vallarta, and then heads up towards maybe the San Blas area of Mexico. I'll show you that more in detail in just a moment. We're going to get back to Roslyn. There it is over there on the satellite animation. But the rest of the Atlantic Basin, this is a non-tropical area of energy trying to develop into sort of one of these coastal hybrid kind of storms. There's a front associated with it. There's some energy out in the subtropical Atlantic. That's what helped to prompt, actually that is right there, the tropical weather outlook. Lots of strong westerly winds elsewhere. So really not expecting much over the next few days of any significance. But we're going to have to start watching this region right through here as we progress through next week and towards the end of the month as we close out October, and I'll show you why in just a little bit here. Let's first, though, focus on our strong hurricane here in the Eastern Pacific. Well-defined eye right there, very round in nature, very clear. That is an indication of a warming eye, a clearing eye. That is a very intense hurricane. The eye wall around it, the central dense overcast. And you can even see as we zoom in here pretty tight that it's throwing these gravity waves out from the top there up into bumping up against the stratosphere. Just a lot of upward motion, a lot of air coming in and just getting heaved up because the outflow is very favorable for the system to just throw all of that air out into the upper part of the atmosphere. A very efficient machine taking advantage of the very warm water temperatures of the Eastern Pacific, and this is all going to make its way eventually up towards a landfall somewhere up here in Mexico over the next 12 to 18 hours. And then the remnants, of course, are going to spread inland and bring rain and the risk of flooding, mudslides, and all sorts of calamitous weather, very nasty, very dangerous, into Mexico from there. Now, if you don't know your geography, you do have Puerto Vallarta down here, pretty big area, pretty big population center, and even though the core will stay west of that area, there could be some pretty significant impacts, especially as the system goes by and you get the winds that funnel into this area as the eye goes by. It won't be that right front quadrant. It'll be sort of the rear of the hurricane as it goes by. That bottom south quadrant will send westerly to southwesterly winds into that area. We'll zoom in a minute. I'll show you some of those geographic locations that could be impacted. So even though Puerto Vallarta won't get the core, it is still going to be pretty impactful for that area. And then I am most concerned with this area right up here where the Pacific can really get funneled in here and you can get a massive surge. I was there last year for Hurricane Pamela. As I mentioned yesterday, I drove from Puerto Vallarta with Brent, and we came up along the coast, finally ended up in Mazatlan over here for Pamela last year, and we visited this part of the coast, and I'm going to show you a video clip of that in a minute and just show you how vulnerable they are down there. All right, so here's the interactive track map from our site, and again, there's the port down there, Puerto Vallarta, and yes, it's a very important port area. It's a high population center, you name it. Now, this is interesting. The reason that this is not aligned right here is not because our map is broken. This is the intermediate advisory where you just get a position update, but not a new track forecast. So the afternoon update, 12 Mountain Time, so that would be 2 p.m. Eastern Time, it is to the northeast. It's left of track. One way to put it, I'm sorry, to the northwest of where it should be. It's west or left of the track. What does that mean? Well, if it doesn't correct back, it could be outside of that track area and go a little bit more up the coast. We'll have to wait and see what happens with it. It's not significant, but as we saw with Ian, it is significant in terms of who gets that core, and especially when we're talking about a very intense hurricane like Roslyn, those wobbles there, if it's off track a little bit, it doesn't look like a lot. In fact, let's use the distance calculator that Will, our programmer, has built into this. So it's off course by no more than, what does that look like, 16 miles? So again, you're like, it's not a big deal. But if the radius of maximum winds is not in that 16-mile area, if you're just outside of it, then that can make a huge difference in whether or not you're in it or out of it. And that tiny core there of the hurricane, those wobbles do make a difference. So where is it headed from here? Well, if we scooch up, we can watch that track there, and inside the cone. Remember, the cone is just about where the center is most of the time. That doesn't tell us about the impacts, and this is a great example of that. Puerto Vallarta itself is outside of the cone of uncertainty. But that doesn't mean there won't be any impacts there. As the hurricane goes by, those bands will rotate around, so you're going to get very heavy rain, some flooding down here coming down out of this rugged terrain. And as it goes by, like I mentioned, you're going to get the wind that will turn around from this way. Once the center is up here, those counterclockwise winds will be coming around this way, and some of those will funnel directly into that area. So there should be a sizable surge of water as the hurricane goes by and those winds switch around, even though Puerto Vallarta is not in the cone. Very, very important to note that. I don't know exactly what's going to happen with the surge there, but just logic would dictate that with a strong hurricane, and you look down here, we can zoom in even more, the beauty of this map here. This is the airport that I flew into. I remember the area nice. Judith lives down there, the woman that helped Brent and I out as a guide during our Pamela mission last year. So yes, as the hurricane goes by, those winds are going to come around from the west and northwest, and eventually from the southwest, and all of this region could be subject, especially because it's so concave. I mean, it's perfect. It's just going to catch that area of the coastline is going to catch the ocean there, the Pacific. So, people down there, just tell them, please be ready for the potential of a significant storm surge, high waves, battering waves. Yeah, that could be a real big problem. Then, of course, the hurricane comes up, the center of it forecast to make landfall just to the northwest here of San Blas. Now, I was down there last year with Brent and Judith. Again, we left Puerto Vallarta, and we took sort of a coastal route over here, and then made our way back up towards the main highway, and finally we went on up towards Mazatlan from there. But I visited down here. We got right down to the water. We had dinner at a local cafe, and this is what it looks like down there, in case you were wondering. We'll mute it. I know it's beautiful to hear the ocean. That's last year, last October, and this is that area. You can really pile up the water there. That's what I'm concerned about. These small, quaint little villages along the coast there of Mexico, Pacific Mexico. That's so picturesque, picture postcard. You get out there with some watercolors and paint that, but it is very vulnerable, and that is that area right there, San Blas, all of this area through here where the water could really get funneled from that onshore flow in that right front quadrant of the hurricane. That could be really, really dangerous for people down there. And again, I know it a little bit because I was there. So it just, there's a little bit more of a vested interest because I have visited the region. Then from there, the hurricane moves into Mexico, on into the inland areas, might even retain its tropical depression, tropical cyclone status, not far from getting into Texas. We'll have to see about that. A lot of that's going to get torn up, the circulation over the high mountains there. And boy, these are beautiful down here too. They're very jungle looking. We flew over that coming out of Houston last year. Brent and I did. Flew over all of that, landing in Puerto Vallarta. Just a beautiful, rugged, green area. It really is. It's incredible. In fact, just a little bit of note for you. All of this very heavily vegetated, jungle-ish looking area, that sends what we call evapotranspiration moisture up into the desert southwest of the U.S. and northwest Mexico to help fuel the monsoon, the Sierra Madre Occidental. That is a source of moisture from evapotranspiration. That's a real word. I'm not making that up. Where the trees and the vegetation release moisture into the atmosphere. That's a huge area of greenage, as they say. It's not just a term from the movie Twister. It's true. And that's, and I'm just getting on a tangent here, but the hurricane is going to cross that, and there's going to be a lot of rainfall in that area, and a lot of villages along those streams and rivers. We saw them last year. I feel for those people. This is going to be an impactful event for our friends in Mexico. And then some of that energy will make it into the lower 48 over here and combine with some energy coming out of the Rockies, and we could get a pretty good storm system setting up that'll eventually make its way across the east here next week. We'll talk about that more tomorrow and into Monday. All right, I already showed you the video here. Let's kill that. Real quick, a look at the analysis of the hurricane itself. This is the track map from the National Hurricane Center. Your watches and warnings are all in there. The cone of uncertainty, whatever you want to call it. I know there's going to be a lot of debates now after Ian about what to do with the cone. I've already gone over that the impacts are going to be well outside the cone, no doubt about it. And again, just looking at this satellite loop real quick, that's the hurricane right there, that whole thing. It's not a little dot, it's not a cone or whatever. That whole thing is the hurricane. And that whole giant piece of energy is headed towards Mexico. And again, yes, there will be impacts, even in Puerto Vallarta, that's not in the cone. Really, really important to note that. And real quick, looking at the model guidance, overall the track guidance fairly tightly clustered with a landfall down there. Look at that, some of the guidance right over that San Blas region. Yuck. I mean, such a beautiful area. Again, because I was there, I think it matters to me even more because I've seen it with my own two eyes. Intensity is peaked out at Cat 4, should rapidly weaken, of course, after landfall. All right, real quick, looking at the Vorticity Signature. There's the hurricane in the Pacific, fairly well organized, certainly, that's what it looks like. There's some energy that's going to try to gather and become this sort of harassing coastal storm, is a good way to put it. Some coastal impacts, minor coastal flooding in some select areas over here. Rainy, kind of cool as the latter part of the weekend wears on. And then there's that energy out in the subtropical Atlantic that may or may not try to do something on its way off to the northwest over here. Nothing down here yet, but I think there is at least a small chance, if I had to put a number on it, I would say 10% right now. Over the next 10 days, looking out 10 days, the GFS especially, very, very insistent and persistent. It's insisting on a persistent basis, if that makes sense, that some energy is going to gather in the Southeast Caribbean, just north of South America there, and try to develop into a tropical cyclone. It's on there, run after run after run. And here's what it looks like in the GFS here. This is today's 12Z. Let's move this out. 48 hours, nothing down there really. 72, same kind of thing. There's some of that energy, by the way, that comes out of, part of that's in training the energy from Roslyn, and then there's some other energy coming out of the Rockies. You're going to get some snow in the Intermountain West. We're almost to the wintertime stuff here, but we're still in hurricane season, so we need to be watching out for that more. The winter stuff will come later. Believe me, we'll get there. Anyway, there's 4 days, and then finally at 5 days, just starting to see the beginnings of a little bit of energy right there coming in near the southern Windward Islands, Trinidad, Tobago, and vicinity, and a little bit of a turning overall of the wind field down here, a perturbation as we call it, just a little bit of a change in the overall environment there. That's day 5. At day 6 and day 7, it gets even more pronounced down there, a little bit of a gyre that sets up, if you will, a large circulation, and it starts to take off from there. Now, a couple things that are important to note. This is not 10 days from now. This is starting to slide in closer. For those of us that watch this, I know the folks at Storm 2K that have watched these things for years, they know about this, that time slippage, if it just keeps getting on out 8, 9, 10 days out and it never moves up in time, you start dismissing it as the model is feeding back on some piece of energy, and we really can't think of it as very reliable or anything to really worry about. This situation, it is starting to move in a little bit closer. Day 5, you can just start to spot the seedling for it, and then it blossoms from there. And then just to show you how this evolves, get rid of me and the telestration, maybe, if it'll let me. Come on, thank you. Watch what happens beyond day 7. It develops it, absolutely. So we're going to want to watch this. This is way out in time here, but the genesis of it starting at day 5, all right, I'm a little bit more interested in it. That's the best way to describe it. And just to see, well, what do the upper levels look like? At 200 millibars, oh yeah, at day 5, there's the makings of an upper level anticyclone over that region. Light winds aloft, your shearing winds, your destructive winds are all up here. So it is at least plausible. And that anticyclone really gets established down there very, very well by day 7. So it is plausible. You know, it's not completely out of the realm. You know, it's not crazy talk, so to speak, in this area. And then, of course, all the way over here. These are all areas that are favored this time of year. We've seen it before. It's not unprecedented. So we will need to pay attention to that. And that is what I will certainly do. Part of my job, right? But first, Roslyn headed from Mexico there. I'm in touch with a couple of people down there in the Puerto Vallarta area, and might get some reports and some videos from them. Again, not a direct hit to Puerto Vallarta, but it doesn't matter. The impacts there could be significant. And then farther up the coast, especially near San Blas, and 50 miles either side, really concerned for those folks, and then inland from there as I outlined, all right? We'll see what happens tomorrow. It will be happening, so when I do my update tomorrow, we will see what's going on then. Hopefully, Roslyn will weaken and might bring down that surge and wind threat, but the rainfall will still certainly be there, and we'll stay on top of it. And, of course, the potential for something trying to brew in the Eastern Caribbean. That is it from me for today. Have a great rest of your Saturday. Again, I am Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack. I'll be back with more for you tomorrow.